Yeah, thanks for this time together. Thank you for the relationships and the experiences that you give us. Um, Help us to be able to use them this week to be a blessing to others. Help us to not be concentrated too much on things of this world. Help us to not worry about things we don't have control over. Help us to understand what we do have control over. And anxious to see the experiences you give us. Amen. All right. So as I talked about today, we're going to talk about the truth side, truth and grace. Um, in a lot of communications with people, notice that people either like to communicate with the truth or with grace. A lot of times people don't particularly like to communicate with truth and grace. So they're either going to be very grateful and not always share truth with people, or to be very truthful and not seem very graceful at all. Buttons. Turn off. That's the whole presentation. That's it. There you go. That's what it is. So, a lot of times we think of truth and knowledge as being the same thing. So we think if we have knowledge about a situation, we must know the truth about that situation. Truth is a body of real things, events, or facts. Knowledge is a circumstance or condition to apprehend the truth. So a lot of times we get to a situation where we think that we're learning truth when really what we're learning is knowledge, and it just is a slight difference, but it's an important difference in the fact that we will learn a whole bunch of knowledge about something. It reminds me of when I was in history class in high school. I learned history of the Civil War from just north of the Mason-Dixon line near Gettysburg. What I learned, the knowledge I learned, was slightly different than the knowledge that they would learn in Texas from somebody like uh, Matt Stallman or Dave Fry when they were in the high school. They learned slightly different knowledge, um, and that knowledge was still knowledge, it was still facts, but it didn't really give you the same truth of what the entire situation was. You had a slight bias based on where you grew up and where you learned this stuff. So truth is not based on my understanding. So knowledge is usually based on my understanding. Truth is not based on my understanding. It's not based on your understanding or their understanding. It's just truth. It's just is what it is. If there is gravity on the earth, that's truth. Um, Knowledge is based on my understanding or something or knowing something. And a lot of times we get to the point where we're looking for these ideas of truth, and we have knowledge where we're seeking truth. Absolute truth is something that's true at all times in all situations, and that's can become a lot harder to find in science. Um, John Dewey said in 1933, no one no one knows what truth actually is, and there's this idea that logicalness and that you don't really have this idea of absolute truth in science. We struggle with truth when it's in conflict with our own knowledge or experiences. So I can remember, when I first heard one of my friends uh, explain to me some of the ideas. He was in uh, the military during the 90s, and he was working in Central America. And he first explained to me how his belief was, while he was in PSYOPs, that the U.S. government was one of the largest drug lords in Central America. And I just couldn't believe that. That was not my knowledge or experience. And I really struggled with truth in that conflict. Whether that was truth or not, I don't know. But I struggle with it when we have things that go against what you believe. We think about truth in streams and stream restoration, and a lot of you have heard me talk about the idea of Lula Leopold and his idea of why does a stream meander. So he used to ask graduate students, why does a stream meander? And the idea is that they'd give them some sort of truth about why a stream meanders. Well, what would end up happening is that you look at a stream, you look at the evidence of why something meandered. This is Lower Bodark down in Texas and you see erosional processes and the aspect or the angle that you're looking at, you're saying, okay, well, it meanders because of, you have accretion on the bar and it pushes out towards lateral migration. But you change your context and you look out farther and you think you understand it from a landscape view, but then your context moves out even farther and you realize, okay, well, there might be something that has been adjusted by other people. Maybe that's why it meanders. And then you move your context out farther and you realize that there's larger forces that are at work, like the Red River on this Bodar Creek, that are pushing this river and push people to try to adjust the river. And then you look at the complexity of the Red River itself. And ultimately, the truth that Luna Leopold would say when asked why do rivers meander, his truth in that situation was, I don't know, or we don't know. Because at that point, we didn't know why they meandered. So in other words, it's not an absolute truth, but the relative truth was that we just don't know. And sometimes our relative truth is what we allow to control our aspects of our life. We live in what people are calling a post-truth era right now, which is a very odd phrase. But what it says is historians are calling this a post-truth era, which means that we're relating situations and people, and we're taking our emotions and we're allowing ourselves to find news feeds or information that will help us confirm or deny what we want to already confirm or deny. So we are surrounding ourselves in 24/7 news publications or Twitters or Facebook, and we generally surround ourselves with the things that we want to hear. So if we want to hear that the world's flat, and I'm not saying the world's flat, but if we want to hear that the world's flat, and if we tweet that, and if we have Facebook related to that, we're going to see news articles and we're going to see things come out saying that the world's flat, and you'll hear people from the flat world theory type things saying the world's flat. And that's really important because we, living in what the historians call this post-truth era, we find ourselves saying that we think that news is equal to truth and knowledge is equal to truth, but a lot of times the news that we're hearing is not true. I mean, this is never before have you heard of this idea of fake news that we do now. Both sides of the aisle, or all three sides, or all 27 sides, however you look at it, but everybody will say there's some sort of fake news that's out there. And this is the idea of looking at truth in life. So in fluvial geomorphology, do we have absolute truth? Conservation of mass, momentum, energy, gravity. These are things that we usually say are kind of absolute in fluvial geomorphology. But if we look at these in the grand scheme of things, conservation of mass works on simple equations, and they work really well, but we still do not know if they're absolutely true in all situations. We know that mass has to go somewhere, but we're not always able to account for them in the equations that we use for conservation of mass. We know that fish need water. We know that density on this earth for water is 62.4 pounds per cubic feet at STP. So we do have some things that we treat as absolute truths. Whether they're really absolute truths or relative truths, it's hard to know, but in general, we have a minimal amount of things that we can treat as absolute truth. In this post-truth ideology, we surround ourselves with publications and things that will make us feel the way that we want to feel at times. And I don't say we always do that, but we run a risk of doing that. If we feel like news is feeling really nasty and we feel one article that we really like, a lot of times people will post that to social media without even reading the entire article just because the headline was good to them. It made them feel good. Relative truth in fluvial geomorphology, we have relative truths. I mean, some are as silly as water flows downhill, but everybody knows that water will flow uphill if you have enough money or you have enough change in pressure. Now, generally, it's going to always flow down gradient, but that gradient could be related to money. Regional curves are relative truth. Regression equations are relative truth. You start to get to more models, and you know that they're more relative truth and comparative truth than they are absolute truth. So we run the risk of in this post-truth ideology of surrounding ourselves with these relative truths and trying to treat them as absolute truths in our life. Um, so, the question is, do we want to seek truth, or do we only want to seek knowledge in our lives? If we want to, you know, without truth, knowledge is kind of counterfeit and meaningless. So if we don't really know what the true aspect of something is, and we have all sorts of knowledge about things, it's kind of like knowing everything there is to know about Harry Potter. Well, ultimately, it's meaningless because I don't have a quid or whatever it is in Harry Potter. I don't know all those words, but I don't. None of that stuff really means a whole lot. Even though I have a whole lot of knowledge of that situation, it's knowing all the names of all the planets in Star Wars. It's not very useful. It's meaningless, but I do have knowledge of it. It's just not truth in that. So, we think about this in eco river sciences, and we have truth that comes, it can be analog, it can be empirical, it can be analytical. And I think in our lives, we have a lot of different aspects of where truth comes from. And sometimes it's just from that situation of saying, okay, well, uh, you know, Brad did something that worked out pretty good, so I'm going to try to do that. Or maybe it can be something empirical and say, okay, well, we have 5 guys I know, and they all ended up going to Starbucks for coffee in the morning, and all of them, worked better in the morning after they had Starbucks coffee. So that's empirical. Or you can have something that's analytical, and you try to put a mathematical equation to why we find truth in something. Ultimately, we never find enough truth in any equation that we're working in science, and we end up having to put trust into something. Um, there's a lady named Jennifer Worth that said there's a greater gift there is a greater gift than the trust of others, that is the trust of oneself. And what ends up happening is we find ways of being able to our find our truth from others, and we have to trust others even though we don't know the situation of their truth. But trust is as much of a gift, and it builds, and trust will build on other trust. So as you trust somebody and you think they're showing you truth, you'll continue to trust that person. But it's once that trust is gone, it's hard to get it back. So we want to be trusted, and this is one of our situations that we struggle with a lot of times. Is sometimes it's better. Uh, Buddha had said sometimes it's better to be kind than right. We shared this before. We do not need an intelligent mind that speaks, but a patient heart that listens. You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger. Um, and in that, what this is really saying is sometimes we can be true or we can be right, but we're really mean in that. I heard a pastor say this week that truth without grace is just mean. And I would say it's not just mean, but I'd say it can be mean at times. If you're saying truth about something that somebody else wants to hear, it's not always mean, but it can be mean. And St. Thomas said, disciple of Jesus said, Lord, how will we know where you are or where you're going? Jesus had said he had to go to the Father and he was going to be leaving, and he said he gave an idea of how he would die in the future. And Jesus answered saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Thomas was blessed with the questions and the courage to ask the situation. And I think sometimes when we look for truth, we're looking for truth in situations, but then we get too ashamed to ask a question. To continually ask questions of each other, of God, but it's important that we don't latch on to truth and try to force truth down people that aren't asking the questions. If we're asked questions related to what we see as truth, it's important that we can answer that. But too often we want to tell people what we see as truth when they have a different situation, different background than we do, and they're not asking. Um, Jesus said, all who come before me all who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved. He will come in and go and find pastures. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that you may have life, and you may have life to its fullest. Truth was not share truth with people so that their life would be miserable. It came so that they would be able to have life to the fullest. And we share truth with people, and we share truth in the I got you moments of our lives where we're like, okay, well, here, now you need to know the truth. And by the way, here it is, and you were wrong, and I got you. And I think without being able to walk in grace or love towards people, truth is just mean and it'll turn people off a lot of times. Um, Ephesians says, "Let no corrupt talk come out of your mouth, but what is good and uplifting, fit for the occasion, that it may by grace be given to those who can hear." Um, and then later it says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgive each other, just as Christ has forgave you." And I think when we use truth as a weapon, um, it becomes a lot more hurtful and will separate us from others and will divide us. Um, I listen to current things related to political things, and I see truth on both sides. A true event that happened that's used as a weapon towards somebody else, and it does not build people together. Next week, we'll talk about grace and what grace means and how we are to communicate with truth and grace, not just truth. But grace is kind of like what's laid out in 1 Corinthians 13:4. Love is patient, kind, does not envy, does not boast, and is not proud. Um, when we look at grace, it's really a way that we can share and show love towards others. Um, so, with that, we're getting be about 20 minutes into this. I'm going to move on to a quote from Proverbs that I think it's kind of funny for being an old ancient book, but stupid people think they are always right. Wise people listen to advice. When a fool is annoyed, he quickly lets you know. Smart people will ignore an insult. Proverbs 12, 15 to 16. I know that is also duplicated in some Chinese proverbs as well, because I read some, I have it listed here. I think part of speaking in truth is we want to speak in truth towards people, but we don't have to make the assumption that we're always right in a situation and that people will always see us as being right. And we want to know that the truth that we're speaking is an absolute truth opposed to a relative truth. And relative truths are a lot more common than absolute truths. So, um, I'll open it up for a couple of thoughts. If anybody has anything they want to add for the next 15 seconds. If nobody says anything, then we'll move on to the MCDA and optimization type of ideas using risk analysis. Yeah, thank you for this time together today. Please help us to be able to see uh, what truth is in our situations and help us to be open to truth in new ways and aspects and help us to be able to listen to people and help us not to be so focused on the I got you moments to tell people what truth is opposed to opportunities to listen to others. Um, we appreciate that you're still working on each one of us and that we're all on different journeys, and we're thankful. Amen. All right. So we'll move on to